Welcome to Night Shift Pulse. Comment your city and the time below. The night connects us all. If you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe. Let's step into the dark. The rules were never meant to keep the patients safe. I had already typed the last line of my note when the cursor moved on its own, one space at a time, as if someone unseen was finding room to add their own documentation. The fluorescent lights over the nurses' station did that familiar, tired stutter, and every door on the hallway panel went from red to green without a single badge swipe. On monitor 7, a patient who was not on my unit sat upright in bed and looked directly into the camera like he could see me. He opened his mouth and recited my full name, slow and careful, the way you read it off an ID badge when you were making sure you had the right person. I worked as a licensed practical nurse on nights, psychiatric intake and observation at a state hospital in the Mississippi Delta. When people heard state hospital, they pictured a campus with manicured lawns and a crisp security presence, like a movie set. What we had was an aging compound of connected brick, buildings that sweated in the humidity. The halls held smells the way old carpet held smoke. Institutional cleaner, damp plaster, stale coffee, and the sharp bite of alcohol wipes. The official name on my badge was longer than what everyone used. We called it Delta State, or just the hospital. It sat far enough out that the highway noise faded into the trees, but close enough to low land that storms seemed to gather there like it was a bowl. In summer, thunder rolled for hours. In winter, the rain did not fall so much as press down. I had been an LPN for 8 years. I was comfortable with routine charting systems, medication passes, observation protocols, and the small negotiations that made a locked ward run. People told you to be brave in psych. The truth was, it was mostly patience and paperwork. The dangerous moments were rare. The rest was structure, meal times, checks, med compliance, behavior notes, shift handoffs, and the steady work of keeping the environment calm enough for the patients to keep their footing. Night shift made you procedural. You learned to keep your voice level. You learned to make decisions with a tired brain and still be able to justify them in documentation. You learned what to do when you were short-staffed because you were always short-staffed. My transfer to the observation ward happened because I had a clean record, I rarely called out, and I knew how to do intake without turning it into a confrontation. The observation unit was a holding space inside a long-term hospital. It was where people went for the first 72 hours of a stay, or where long-term residents went when their presentation changed and they needed higher monitoring. It was also where the administration placed anything they did not know what to do with yet. If a patient arrived with a messy history and no clear placement, they waited with us. The first night I reported for the job, the outgoing nurse did not do what outgoing nurses usually did. There was no casual summary, no here's who is sleeping, here's who is needy, here's who might throw a fit. She did not even lead with the narc count. Her name was Laurel. She had that tired efficiency I respected, the kind that came from being right too many times to waste words. She met me at the double doors that separated administration hallway from Unit C, checked my badge with a glance, and let me in. "Before you do anything," she said, "you read this." She handed me a single sheet of paper folded twice. It felt too crisp for something that lived in a ward. I unfolded it on the nurse's station counter. It was typed, not copied, like someone had retyped it cleanly. The header did not have the hospital logo. There was no policy number, no date, just a title, Night Shift Rules, Unit C, and Overflow. Under that, there were lines, each one numbered, written in plain language that did not sound like an institutional policy and did not sound like a prank either. They were not wash your hands rules. They were not do not leave sharps unattended. They were behavioral restrictions that made no sense in a normal environment. but they were specific enough to feel serious. Rule 1. Do not make direct eye contact with any patient in the east hallway between midnight and 1 in the morning. If a patient attempted eye contact, look at their wristband and speak only the last name printed there. Rule 2. Do not enter room 12 first on rounds. Room 12 had to be checked after room 10 and before room 11 regardless of where you started. Rule 3. If the intercom emitted static that lasted longer than 3 breaths, do not answer it. Remove the handset from the cradle, set it on the counter, and wait until the static stopped on its own. Rule 4. Medication pass had to be completed by 2:20 in the morning, not earlier than 1:45, not later than 2:20. If a patient refused medications, the refusal had to be charted immediately before moving to the next room. Rule 5. Do not leave any intake form with blank fields on the counter. If a field could not be filled, write unavailable and initial. Rule 6. If a door unlocked without a badge swipe, do not pass through it. Relock it. Document maintenance anomaly in the shift note, but do not generate an incident report. Rule 7. If a patient asked what day it was, answer with the day of the week only. Do not provide the date. Rule 8. If you heard your name spoken over the hallway speaker, do not respond. Do not acknowledge it. Continue your task and do not look up. Rule 9. Do not check the back stairwell between 3 in the morning and 4 in the morning. If you heard movement there, call security and wait at the nurse's station until they arrived. Rule 10. If the electronic charting system populated a note you did not write, do not delete it. Add an addendum stating auto-populated content noted and sign your name. There were more, 14 total. Each one sounded like a superstition that had been made into a procedure. Laurel watched me read. She did not fidget. She did not smile like she was testing me. "Is this," I said carefully, "a unit joke?" "No," she said. I looked at her. I did not know her well, but I knew her expression. There was no play in it. "It's not policy," I said. "It's not in the manual," she agreed. "But it's what keeps the shift workable." I asked the question I was supposed to ask. "Who wrote this?" She hesitated long enough that I could feel the weight of it. "People who stayed," she said, and then, like that was too much of an answer, she added, "It was handed to me. I'm handing it to you." She moved to the medication cart like she had done it 1,000 times. "We'll do count." We did narcotics count, signed the controlled log, checked PRN stock, verified emergency kit seals, and reviewed the bill census. This was where a normal handoff would have settled my nerves: numbers, medications, conditions, observation levels. Instead, every normal fact now had a shadow. The unit held 12 rooms. 4 of them were in the east hallway, which was a narrower corridor that ended in a heavy door labeled "Stairwell Authorized Only." The west hallway held the day room, the quiet room, and the med room. The nurse's station sat in the center like a glass aquarium, monitors overhead and a wall panel showing door statuses. Red meant locked, green meant unlocked, yellow meant in transition. Laurel gave me the roster. "We're full tonight," she said. 2 on 1-to-1, 1 on 15-minute checks, the rest on 30. I asked about staff. "It's you, me until shift change, and 1 tech," she said. "Security on call." "1 tech for 12? I asked. "That's what they scheduled," she said flat. Her tone told me complaining would not change it. Still, I felt the familiar anger at administration. They always measured staffing like it was a grocery budget. The problem was you did not stock shelves with patients. The tech on nights introduced himself as Reed. He looked younger than me, but he carried himself like someone who had learned to keep his shoulders loose in a place where tension could be contagious. Reed did not mention the rule sheet. He did not react when Laurel told him I was new to the unit. He just nodded and asked, "You want me to do first rounds or you?" Laurel left at 11. She clocked out, took her bag, and paused at the nurse's station as if she wanted to say something else. Her eyes went to the rule sheet in my hand. "Treat it like oxygen," she said. "You don't notice it until you don't have it." Then she walked out through the double doors, and I was standing in a ward that hummed and smelled of damp institutional air, holding a list of instructions that did not belong to any nursing program. I told myself it was a culture thing. Rural facilities developed habits. People got superstitious when they worked too many nights in too much fluorescent light. I had seen nurses refuse to say certain words, like saying a calm shift out loud would jinx it. I had seen techs tap badge readers twice like a ritual. I could accept that the ward had its own mythology. What I could not accept was the specificity. Room 12, a 1-hour block for eye contact, a medication pass window down to the minute. That was not folklore. That was management. I folded the sheet and placed it in the front of my clipboard where I could see it. At midnight, I started my first full set of rounds. Reed walked with me for the first loop. We checked the 1-to-1 patients. One was a man named Grant who had been placed on constant observation for self-harm risk. The other was a woman named Harper who had come in from a county jail intake hold, still agitated, still wearing the orange paper scrubs they issued in booking. Neither of them did anything unusual. They were tired, medicated, and watched. The other patients were long-term residents cycling through observation because their symptoms had escalated. A man named Drew paced the day room, murmuring to himself. A woman named Quinn sat at a table folding and refolding a napkin. Another patient, Morgan, slept with their hands tucked under their chin like a child. The unit felt calm. That was not a word you used lightly in psych, but the energy was low. The televisions were off. The overhead lights were dimmed. The only consistent sound was the distant fan noise and the occasional shift of a body on a mattress. When I reached the east hallway, I remembered Rule 1. Midnight to 1. No eye contact. That sounded ridiculous until I realized how often you made eye contact as part of care. It was instinctive. You looked at faces to check affect, to check alertness, to assess agitation. I had been trained to use eye contact as a tool. Gentle, not challenging, but present. Now I had to keep my gaze down. So I did what the rule told me. When I passed the room doors, I looked at the small wristband check window on each door. The patients who were asleep were visible only as shapes. The ones awake watched me. At room 9, I felt eyes on me, sharp and focused. A patient I had not met yet stood in the doorway shadow inside their room, close enough that the wristband on their arm was visible through the window. Their face was angled in a way that made it clear they were trying to catch my gaze. I looked at the wristband. The last name printed there was Parker. "Parker," I said as calmly as I could in the tone you used when confirming a patient identity. "How are you doing?" There was a pause, like the patient had expected something else. The patient said, "You're late." I kept my eyes on the wristband. "I'm doing rounds," I said. "You're safe." The patient did not answer. I moved. Henri did not comment. He did not ask why I was staring at wrists. When we returned to the nurse's station, he simply recorded his check marks on his sheet and said, "You good?" "Fine," I said. I charted as I went. The charting system was a standard electronic health record, slow and cluttered with drop-down menus and mandatory fields. The hospital had a culture of documentation that bordered on obsession. If something happened and it was not charted, it did not exist. If it was charted wrong, it existed in a way that could cost you your license. So I charted everything in the language I had been taught. Patient calm, patient asleep. No acute distress, no PRN required, Observation level maintained. I built my notes like bricks. At 1 in the morning, Rule 1 expired. I did not feel relief because I still did not believe in it, but my eyes lifted naturally when I passed a patient in the day room and it felt normal again. 2 things happened during that first hour that I did not have a place for in my mind. The first was the intercom static. At 12:30, while I was at the station entering notes, the overhead speaker crackled. A thin hiss, not loud, but distinct. Then the intercom handset on the wall emitted the same sound, like an open line. Rule 3 said if the static lasted longer than 3 breaths, do not answer. Remove the handset from the cradle, set it on the counter, and wait. I watched the handset. My breath counted itself. 1, 2, 3. The static continued. Without thinking too hard about it, I lifted the handset off the cradle and set it on the counter. The static remained in the air for another moment, then ceased. The line went dead. Nothing else happened. The unit did not react. Reed did not look up. I told myself it was a coincidence and a clever way to keep staff from tying up the line with hello, hello during system feedback. The second thing was Rule 2, the Room 12 sequencing. Room 12 was at the far end of the west hallway, near the quiet room. On my first independent round after Reed took a break, I started at the end of the corridor out of habit. When you started rounds, you often started at the far end and worked back so you did not miss anyone. I walked toward Room 12. I reached for the handle and the rule sheet flashed in my mind. Do not enter Room 12 first. It had to be checked after Room 10 and before Room 11, regardless of where you started. That made no logistical sense. Room 10 and Room 11 were across the hall from each other, and Room 12 was adjacent, but the order was arbitrary. Still, I had the thought Laurel had placed in my head. Treat it like oxygen. You don't notice it until you don't have it. So I stepped back. I went to Room 10. The patient inside was asleep. I checked breathing, noted position, moved on. I checked Room 12 next. The patient inside was sitting upright in bed, hands on knees, staring at the door like they had been waiting. Their wristband read Casey. Their face was blank, but the posture was too intentional. Casey, I said in the calm voice that kept situations from escalating. You doing all right? The patient's eyes flicked up. I met them for a second, then remembered nothing, and the rules told me not to now. It was after 1. Casey smiled very slightly. Thank you, Casey said like I had done them a favor. I moved to Room 11. I finished the round. Nothing happened. But the moment stuck in my mind because the patient in Room 12 had looked like a person caught in a rehearsal, relieved when the actor hit their cue. As the nights continued, I followed the rules the way you followed a checklist. Not because I believed in them, but because the ward stayed calm when I did. It was like learning a unit's unspoken rhythm. Every floor had things that were not written. Who needed a certain tone? Who escalated if you stood in the doorway too long? Who responded to firm boundaries? The rule list became an extension of that. I built my routine around it. At 11:30, I reviewed the census, confirmed observation levels, and checked for any intake holds scheduled to arrive. At midnight, I did east hallway rounds with eyes down. At 1:30, I prepped the medication cart. Between 1:45 and 2:20, I did med pass, not earlier, not later. That timing was tight. It meant you could not start early to get ahead. It meant you had to hit the window even if the unit was quiet. That irritated me, but I complied. Med pass on a psychiatric ward was different than on a medical unit. It was less about IV antibiotics and more about compliance, side effects, and behavioral stability. You had scheduled meds like mood stabilizers and antipsychotics, and you had PRN meds like anxiety meds, sleep aids, or agitation meds given as needed. You also had the tension of consent. A patient could refuse unless they were on a court order or emergency status. If they refused, you documented and notified the provider. You did not argue. You did not force. You maintained safety. Rule 4 said if a patient refused, chart the refusal immediately before moving to the next room. That was not typical. Usually you finished the pass and charted after, but I followed it. I carried a portable workstation, rolled it with me, and entered refusals in the hallway if needed. It made the pass slower, but it made it precise. When I obeyed the rules, the unit was almost unnervingly steady. Patients who I knew from previous admissions as volatile were quiet. Drew paced but did not approach staff aggressively. Harper on 1-to-1 slept for long stretches. Parker in room 9 stopped trying to catch my eye during midnight rounds and instead stood with their wristband facing the window like it mattered. The calm felt earned, like a system working. It also felt unnatural. Psychiatric units had a baseline of chaos. People had nightmares. People woke and cried. People shouted for cigarettes. People argued over television remotes. Here on nights, the ward felt like it was holding its breath. I wrote thorough notes. I kept incident reports to a minimum. I started to think maybe the rules were simply effective behavior management disguised as superstition. Maybe staff had learned that direct eye contact in the east hallway triggered something in that corridor's patients, and instead of rewriting policy, they created a ritual. Administration did not officially endorse it. On my third shift, I asked the charge nurse on days, a man named Blake, about it. We were in the break room during my clock out, and he was grabbing coffee before report. He glanced at the sheet when I showed it to him and shrugged. "Unit habits," he said. "Night shift gets weird. As long as nobody's getting hurt and charting is done, the supervisors don't care." "That's your official stance?" I asked. He gave me a look that said I should know better than to ask for an official stance. "Our official stance is to follow policy," he said. "Our real stance is to survive the schedule." That was the kind of truth you heard in state facilities. You did not argue with it. The first time I nearly violated a rule, it happened during an actual nursing situation, not during a ritual. It was a little after 2 in the morning. I was finishing medication pass. I had one more patient to see, Morgan in room 6. Morgan was on 15-minute checks for disorientation and exit-seeking behavior. The tech on rounds had reported that Morgan was more restless than usual, but still redirectable. When I approached room 6, I heard a choking cough, not a psych cough. A physical, wet, urgent sound that made the hairs on my arms rise, the kind that told you someone might be aspirating. I pushed the door open and saw Morgan sitting on the edge of the bed, bent forward, hands at their throat. Their face was flushed. Their eyes were wide. They made a sound like they were trying to pull air around something stuck. This was not a ghost story moment. This was medical. This was the reason nurses stayed alert, even in psych. I stepped forward. I called Morgan's name. I asked if they could speak. They shook their head. I reached for the emergency call button on the wall, the one that alerted other staff and security. My mind was already running through protocol. Assess airway. Encourage cough. Be ready to perform abdominal thrusts if obstruction persisted. Call for medical response. As I moved, I realized my path placed me directly in front of Morgan's eyes. Rule 1 did not apply. It was after 1. Eye contact was allowed. But another rule flashed. Do not stand in the threshold of room 12 when the hallway lights flickered. That was Rule 13, one I had not mentioned yet because it seemed too specific to ever matter. But here I was in room 6 and it was irrelevant. What mattered was Rule 4. Medication pass window. I had just finished it. That was done. Rule 2. Room 12 sequencing. Not relevant. Then I realized the rule I was about to violate was Rule 5. Do not leave intake forms with blank fields on the counter. Also irrelevant. My brain in that moment was overloaded with a list that did not belong in an emergency. That was what made me angry. The rules were noise in a real clinical situation. Morgan's coughing changed. It became a high, thin wheeze. They reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Their fingers were cold and damp. I leaned in, and Morgan's eyes locked on mine. They were not pleading. They were focused, like they were trying to show me something. Morgan's mouth opened, and a piece of chewed medication, half dissolved, fell out onto their lap. Then Morgan took a full breath, shuddered, and began to sob. The crisis passed as quickly as it came. Reed arrived, breathless, because I had hit the emergency call. He took Morgan's vital signs with the portable machine. Blood pressure elevated, heart rate high, oxygen saturation adequate. Morgan kept sobbing, but their airway was clear. The danger was over. I documented it as a choking episode, resolved, patient monitored, provider to be notified. I wrote the incident report because it was required for any medical event. Then I went back to the nurse's station and realized my hands were shaking. Not from the choking, from the moment of eye contact. Because when Morgan had grabbed my wrist, the overhead lights had flickered just once, a quick stutter. I heard the intercom click like it was about to open, then stop. And Morgan in that eye contact had not looked like a disoriented patient. Morgan had looked like a person who recognized me. I tried to tell myself it was adrenaline. Patients in psych units sometimes had moments of startling clarity. It happened. People were not their diagnoses all the time. Still, after I finished charting, I opened the shift handoff binder. It was a thick 3-ring binder kept behind the desk, full of handwritten notes from previous nurses. Officially, shift report was verbal. Unofficially, nights kept a binder because verbal report disappeared, but handwriting stayed. I flipped to older sections. The pages smelled like paper and disinfectant. There were notes about staffing shortages, about broken door alarms, about a patient smearing feces in the day room, about a fight that required restraints. Normal institutional ugliness. Then I saw something that made my throat tighten. A note from 3 years earlier, written in careful block letters. Near miss, room 6, choking episode, avoided prolonged eye contact during light flicker, intercom attempted open line, stopped after handset removed. No incident report filed per unit rules. The handwriting was not Laurel's. It was someone else's. The specificity matched my night. Another note months after. That door panel glitch, all green, relocked per Rule 6. Do not file incident. Another. Chart auto-populated note in patient Quinn, do not delete. Addendum only. My rationalizations began to thin. Habits did not create identical handwriting across years. Superstitions did not anticipate exact electronic behavior. That was when I started to feel like the rules were not made by tired nurses. They were made by someone who had seen the pattern. The pressure that broke me was not supernatural at first, it was administrative. We lost staff, people quit, people got sick, people transferred. The hospital did what it always did. It did not fix anything, it just rearranged the schedule. 1 week I was assigned to cover not only Unit C observation, but also overflow on Unit D, a smaller wing down the hall that held long-term residents with stable presentations. It was a locked unit as well, but less acute. They had their own routines and fewer crises. The problem was the rule sheet was written for Unit C and overflow. Now, overflow meant I had to move between 2 physical spaces with 1 tech and no additional nurse. Administration did not care about the rules. They cared about charting. When I protested to the supervisor, a woman named Jordan with a clipboard and a practiced smile, she said, "As long as documentation is complete and meds are passed on time, we're meeting our requirements." "What about safety?" I asked. She looked at me like I had asked a childish question. Safety is built into our procedures, she said. I wanted to show her the rule sheet. I wanted to ask her if do not answer static on the intercom was built into procedures. But I could already see how that conversation would go. She would dismiss it. She would call it unit habits. Then she would put my name on a list as a problem. So I kept my head down and did the work. That was when following all 14 rules became impossible. Rule 4 demanded medication pass in a strict window. Rule 2 demanded room 12 sequencing. Rule 9 demanded I not check the back stairwell between 3 and 4, which mattered because the stairwell was between Unit C and Unit D. Rule 1 demanded no eye contact in East Hallway between midnight and 1, which mattered because the East Hallway held 2 of the 1-to-1 patients, and 1-to-1 observation required engagement. Rules that were manageable in 1 unit became a web when stretched across 2. On the first night of that new assignment, I tried to comply anyway. I ran my rounds like a circuit, timing myself. I did Unit C East Hallway checks first, eyes on wristbands. I did Unit D rounds next. I returned to Unit C for documentation. I prepped for MedPass. I watched the clock. By 1:30, I was already behind. Not dangerously behind, but behind enough that I could feel the unit's stability as something that required constant attention. A patient on Unit D, a man named Reed, not the tech but a different Reed, began banging on his door demanding to speak to the intake nurse, which was not a role on that unit. He insisted his paperwork was wrong. He shouted about a missing signature. I tried to redirect him, but he kept repeating the same phrase. My intake form is incomplete. Rule 5 echoed in my head. Do not leave intake forms with blank fields. If a field could not be filled, write unavailable and initial. I did not have Reed's intake form. He had been admitted months ago. There should not have been an intake form on nights at all. I went back to the nurse's station on Unit C to check the chart. Reed the tech followed, staying close to the door, watching for agitation. When I logged into the electronic record, the screen stuttered. The cursor lagged. Then Reed's chart opened. The intake form tab, which was usually locked after completion, was open. Fields that should have been filled were blank. I stared at it. The system did not do that. Once intake forms were signed, they were signed. You could view them, but you could not reopen the fields without administrative access. I looked at the clock. 1:43. Medication pass window opened at 1:45. I needed to start. I looked at Reed. Watch Unit D, I said. I need you to stay there. Keep him calm. Reed hesitated. You sure? No choice, I said. I returned to Unit C and started MedPass at 1:45 exactly because Rule 4 had become the spine of my night. I rolled the cart. I scanned wristbands. I handed out cups. I recorded compliance. Halfway through, a patient refused. It was Drew, who normally accepted meds without much conversation. He looked at the cup and said, "Not today." Rule 4 demanded I chart refusal immediately before moving to the next room. I did. I entered the refusal, selected patient refused, typed a brief note, signed. When I looked up, the hallway lights flickered, just once. Drew smiled faintly. Late, he said. I checked my watch. It was 2:10, still within the window. I'm on time, I said. Drew shook his head. Not that, he said. You're late to sign. I felt cold. I finished MedPass at 2:18. I returned the cart, secured medications, signed the controlled log. I breathed out. I had complied. Then I went to Unit D to relieve Reed. The hallway between units was quiet. The door panel showed red, locked, normal. Halfway down, the intercom crackled with static. It lasted longer than 3 breaths. I stopped, removed the handset from the cradle in the hallway, set it on the ledge. The static continued, then stopped. A voice came through the overhead speaker. faint but clear like someone testing a microphone. My name, not shouted, spoken gently, like a coworker calling me from across a room. Rule 8 said, do not respond, do not acknowledge it, continue your task and do not look up. I walked, eyes forward, heart beating hard. The voice repeated my name, slightly distorted as if the speaker were underwater. I did not answer. I did not look up. When I reached Unit D, the door was unlocked. The panel showed green, no badge swipe. The door stood slightly open. Rule 6 said if a door unlocked without a badge swipe, do not pass through. Relock it. Document maintenance anomaly in the shift note, but do not generate an incident report. I stood there, looking at the crack in the door, feeling the humid air from inside. The easy path was to step through. I needed to check on Reed. I needed to cover the unit. I did not step through. I pulled the door closed, waited for the lock to catch, and checked the panel. Red. Locked. I swiped my badge. The panel beeped. Green. The lock clicked. The door opened normally. I stepped inside. Reed was standing at the nurse's station, looking pale. He's been asking for you, Reed said. Who? I asked, though I knew. Reed jerked his chin toward the hallway. Reed in room 3. He stopped banging, but he's saying stuff. I walked to room 3. Reed sat on the bed, hands folded, posture too similar to Casey in room 12. He looked at me with an expression that was almost polite. You fixed the form, he said. I didn't, I said. Reed smiled. You will. I asked him what he meant. He did not answer. He just repeated, you will, like it was a certainty. When I returned to the nurse's station, I checked his chart again. The intake form fields were filled now, not by me. The system showed no audit trail. The fields had been populated with unavailable and initials that were not mine. My stomach turned. That night was the first time I knowingly broke a rule, and I did it for a reason that would have sounded reasonable in any normal facility. It happened because I was exhausted, because the schedule was punishing, because Reed called out, and because administration refused to find coverage. That meant I worked Unit C and Unit D alone for several hours until a float tech arrived. I did my best. I hit the major rules. I kept med pass in the window. I avoided eye contact in the east hallway. I did the room 12 sequencing. I ignored my name over the speaker when it happened. I documented everything. But at around 3:15, a patient on Unit C triggered the door alarm. Morgan, the same patient who had choked weeks earlier, was at the day room exit door, rattling it, trying to get out. They were not aggressive, but they were urgent. Their face was flushed with agitation. I approached. I used de-escalation, the calm voice, the offer of water, the reminder of time. Morgan did not respond. Morgan kept rattling the door. Then Morgan said very clearly, "If you do not open it, you will not get back." Those were not the words of a confused patient. Those were the words of a person delivering a warning. My mind reached for Rule 9. Do not check the back stairwell between 3 and 4. If you heard movement there, call security and wait at the nurse's station until they arrived. The back stairwell was behind that exit door. Morgan's hands were on the handle. I looked at the clock. 3:15. I called security. I requested assistance. Dispatch said they would send someone. Morgan turned slowly and looked at me. In that moment, I realized Rule 9 was not about my safety. It was about the stairwell itself. It was about not interacting with whatever was there during that hour. Morgan's lips moved without sound for a moment, like they were reading. Then Morgan said, "Observation level. Constant." That was my language. That was chart language. That was nursing language. My skin prickled. I told Morgan to step away from the door. Morgan did not. The door alarm kept chirping softly, the warning tone that said, "Door unsecured." I watched the panel. It was red, locked. Then it turned green, unlocked. No badge swipe, no code, no motion sensor, just green. Rule 6 said do not pass through, relock it. Document maintenance anomaly and do not file incident. But Morgan was already pulling it open. I reacted like a nurse, not like a person following a superstition list. I lunged, grabbed the door, and shoved it closed. I pushed Morgan back with my body, not violently, just enough to create space. I used the key switch to relock. I did not stop there. I did what the rules said not to do. I stepped into the threshold for half a second, looking into the dark stairwell beyond because I needed to see if someone was there, if security had opened it, if something mechanical had failed. The stairwell air was colder than the hallway air. It smelled like wet concrete. From below, a sound rose. Not footsteps, not voices, a steady rhythmic noise like paper being flipped page after page, too fast to be hands. I stepped back. I relocked. I told Morgan to sit in the day room. Morgan complied immediately, like their task was done. My heart hammered. I returned to the station and documented maintenance anomaly like the rules said. I did not file an incident report. That part I obeyed. But I had broken Rule 9 by looking into the stairwell during the forbidden hour. Nothing dramatic happened. No figure emerged. No door slammed. The ward did not erupt. Instead, the atmosphere changed in a way I could not chart. The fluorescent hum seemed louder. The air felt heavier. My own thoughts felt slightly delayed, as if my brain were reading from a script that had been smudged. On my next round, I passed room 12. Casey sat upright again. They watched me through the window. "Minor," Casey said. "What?" I asked. Casey smiled. "Minor rule," they said. "That's what you told yourself." My mouth went dry. I did not remember telling myself that out loud. I returned to the station and checked the charting system. The shift note, template I used every night, was open. My name was in the signature field. Under the narrative, a paragraph had appeared that I had not typed. It read, in my own clinical tone, "Environmental instability noted following stairwell threshold breach. Recommend strict adherence to sequence rules to delay convergence." I stared at the words. Convergence was not a term we used in nursing notes. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Rule 10 said if the system populated a note you did not write, do not delete it. Add an addendum stating auto-populated content noted and sign your name. I did it. My fingers moved stiffly. I added the addendum, signed, and saved. The moment I saved, the cursor moved on its own again, adding one more sentence beneath my addendum. "Thank you for participating." That was not clinical. I logged out. I rebooted the workstation. I told myself it was a glitch. But then Morgan in the day room began speaking in a low monotone. Not to anyone in particular, not shouting, just reciting. Chief complaint, agitation. History of present illness. Patient presented via law enforcement. Patient denied suicidal ideation. Patient endorsed auditory hallucinations. It took me a few seconds to realize Morgan was reading an intake form. Morgan did not have an intake form open. Morgan did not have access to the chart. Morgan continued, voice even like someone reading into a recorder. Allergies, none known. Current medications, unknown. Legal status, involuntary hold. The words matched the standard intake template. They were not Morgan's history, they were a form. I approached, careful. "Morgan," I said, "what are you doing?" Morgan looked up at me, eyes calm. "Filling blanks," Morgan said. I felt dizzy. I checked the clipboard. The paper intake forms we kept for backup were in a locked drawer. The drawer was still locked. Morgan's hands were empty. Reed returned around 4, and I told him Morgan was acting unusual. He looked at Morgan, who had stopped reciting, and shrugged the way techs did when they had seen too much. Everybody acts unusual, Reed said. Then quieter. What did you do? I did not answer. I did not know how to say, I looked into the stairwell and now the ward is reading my paperwork back to me. Over the next weeks, the rules broke down around me, not because I became reckless, but because the environment forced breaches. Emergencies overlapped. Patients escalated at the same time, security was delayed, staffing collapsed. And every time a rule bent, reality responded in a way that was subtle enough to deny and consistent enough to terrify. One night, I was forced to start medication pass early because a new intake arrived late and needed immediate PRN for agitation. The patient was a man named Grant. Not the same Grant as before, a different Grant brought in by county deputies. He was sweating, pacing, eyes wide. He demanded to leave. He said he did not know where he was. I assessed. I offered oral PRN. He refused. He began to escalate. I called the on-call provider. I got an order for intramuscular medication emergency. I administered with security present, documented thoroughly, and stabilized him. When I returned to the med cart, it was 1:38. Rule 4 said not earlier than 1:45. I considered waiting 7 minutes. But I had 12 patients and I had already lost time. I told myself it was safer to start now and finish on time. I started MedPass at 1:38. No alarms sounded, no dramatic reaction. But the unit's clocks, the digital ones in the hall and the analog one in the day room, began to disagree. The hall clock showed 1:46. The day room clock showed 1:32. My watch showed 1:39. Time did not distort in a cinematic way. It just became untrustworthy. When I charted, the electronic system stamped entries with times that did not match what I lived. My documentation became a trail of contradictions. Another night I broke Rule 7. A patient asked what day it was, and out of habit I said, "It's Tuesday, August something." I cut myself off, but it was too late. The patient nodded, satisfied, and said, "Good. We have time." That phrase began to appear everywhere, in patient speech, in auto-populated chart notes, in staff handoff binder entries that I did not remember writing. We have time. It became a refrain, like the ward itself believed time was something managed, not lived. Then identities began to blur. The first time it was a wristband mismatch. I entered room 9 expecting Parker because Parker's last name had been the anchor I used during the no eye contact hour. The wristband on the patient's arm still read, Parker. But the face looking back at me was not the same face I had been seeing for weeks. It was subtle. Same age range, same build, but different eyes, different jawline, like an actor recast without telling the audience. I checked the chart. Parker's photo in the system showed the old face. The patient in front of me had no recognition in their expression, as if they had never been Parker. I asked them their name. They said, Casey. I felt cold. Casey was room 12. I went to room 12. The patient there looked like Parker. I checked wristbands. They did not match. Casey's wristband read Casey, but the face was Parker's. Parker's wristband read Parker, but the face was Casey's. The charts did not update. The system insisted they were in the correct rooms. The staff on days wrote notes that assumed everything was normal. I tried to report it to the day charge nurse. I tried to say carefully, "The patient presentations don't match their chart photos." He looked at me like I was sleep-deprived. "Photos are old," he said. "People change." "It's not that," I said. He shrugged. "If the wristband matches the chart, you're fine. Do your checks." That was the institutional answer. Trust the system. Trust the band. Trust the documentation. The horror was that the system itself was changing. One night I opened the charting system and saw my own name listed under attending provider on a patient's admission note. Not as nurse, as provider. I refreshed. It remained. I checked audit trail. It showed no changes. I called information technology, but at 3 in the morning you got voicemail. I wrote an addendum because Rule 10 had trained me to respond to impossible documentation with more documentation. That was how the ward absorbed anomalies, by making them part of the record. The handoff binder began to show entries that I had not written but that were in my handwriting. Not copied, not similar. Identical strokes. One entry described me arriving on my first night, receiving the rule sheet, asking if it was a joke. It described Laurel's exact words. It described the smell of the hallway. It described my thought that the rules were superstition. Then it continued into something that had not happened yet. Breached stairwell threshold at 3:15, heard paperwork flipping, initiated convergence sequence. I stared at that page for a long time, feeling my throat tighten because it meant the binder was not only recording past events, it was anticipating them. I began to understand the structure the rules created. They were not isolated. They were interdependent, like a set of steps in a process that had to be followed in sequence to keep something aligned. The more I complied, the more the ward stayed stable. The more I deviated, the more the ward asserted its own version of reality. It was like an administrative system, a schedule, a flowchart. Compliance delayed a consequence. Non-compliance accelerated it. That was when I began to look for older staff notes beyond the binder. In the hospital, there were storage rooms that held decades of paper charts, boxed and labeled because state facilities kept records forever. There were also old policy manuals that no one opened because everything had moved to electronic systems, but the paper remained like sediment. On a slow night when the unit was calm and Reed was covering rounds, I went to the records room under the pretense of retrieving a missing lab result. The records room was in the basement level where the air felt colder and the humidity turned to a damp chill. The lights buzzed. The shelves were metal and rusty. I searched for anything labeled Unit C. I found old binders of shift notes from years before electronic records. In one binder, dated in the early 2010s, I found a typed rule sheet identical to mine. Same 14 rules, same phrasing. Attached to it was a memo unsigned that described the rules as stabilization measures for night staff. The language was administrative, not clinical. It said rules exist to maintain continuity of care during cyclical transition events. Compliance delays convergence. Non-compliance accelerates. Outcome is not preventable. Staff rotation is expected. Do not attempt to warn day shift. Do not attempt to remove rule sheet. Do not attempt to leave during active cycle. There was no hospital letterhead, no signature. Just that. I felt like I was reading a prophecy written in bureaucratic language. In the same binder, there were incident reports that were never filed officially. Handwritten notes about doors unlocking, intercom static, chart notes writing themselves. And there was a pattern. Every few years, the notes would become frantic. Then the handwriting would change. The names of staff would change. The rule sheet would be reintroduced. The cycle would reset. It was not the patients cycling through care, it was the caretakers. I returned to the unit with the binder hidden under my scrubs jacket. That was a policy violation. Removing records was forbidden, but I needed evidence because I could feel my own grip on reality loosening. I needed something external to anchor me. When I reached the nurse's station, Reed looked up. His face was pale. "Your name?" he said. "What?" I asked. He pointed at the overhead speaker. Static hissed. Then my name came through, clear, spoken in Laurel's voice. I froze. Laurel was not on shift. Laurel had transferred months earlier. Her voice should not have been in the system. Rule 8 said, "Do not respond. Do not acknowledge. Continue task and do not look up." I forced myself to move. I walked to the med room pretending I had a reason. My heart pounded. Laurel's voice repeated my name again, softer, like coaxing. When it stopped, Reed whispered, "Was that her?" I did not answer. Answering would make it real. I began to realize the rules were not about patients at all. They were about the ward's relationship with staff. The ward used the tools of institutional control to shape behavior. Doors, intercoms, charts, schedules. It was like the building had learned how to manage people the way administration managed staff, through compliance, through documentation, through fear of license loss. That was the horror. It spoke my professional language. The cascading consequences came fast once the first minor rule break happened. It was like a dam that had cracked. The next breach was forced. A storm hit, and the power flickered. The backup generator kicked in, but the locks cycled. Doors that should have stayed locked blinked green and red like the building was deciding what it wanted. Rule 6 said if a door unlocked without a badge swipe, do not pass through. Relock it. Document maintenance anomaly. But when the generator stuttered, the doors did not wait for me. They opened and closed in sequence down the hallway like someone was running a test. Red to green to red, one after another like a wave. Patients woke. They sat up, they watched the doors, the intercom, hissed. Static lasted longer than 3 breaths. I lifted the handset and set it down. The static stopped, but the overhead speaker clicked anyway. A voice began reading. It was not my name this time. It was a list of last names, one after another in a monotone. Parker, Casey, Morgan, Quinn, Drew, Grant, Harper. It was the roster. Then it continued. My last name. Reed stared at me. That's staff, he whispered. The voice went on, reading staff names like patient names. It read Reed's last name. It read Laurel's. It read names I did not recognize. Then it stopped. The unit fell into a silence so complete I could hear the fluorescent ballast hum like a living thing. I tried to restore order. I moved through the hall, speaking softly, redirecting patients back to beds, offering PRN medications, using every de-escalation skill I had. Some complied, some did not. But none of them seemed truly agitated. They seemed attentive, like they were waiting for the next instruction. When I checked the charting system, every patient's demographic page had changed. The photos were gone. The names were still there, but the dates of birth were blank. The emergency contact fields were blank. The diagnoses field read unavailable. The system had filled the blanks the way Morgan had said, unavailable. Then I saw something worse. The staff directory tab, which was not usually accessible from my user role, was open. It listed staff names the way patient rosters were listed with bed assignments. Bed 1, Laurel, observation level 1 to 1. Bed 2, Reed, observation level 15-minute. Bed 3, me, observation level constant. My stomach turned. I felt pressure behind my eyes. I signed out. I signed back in. The screen remained. Rule 10 said do not delete auto-populated notes. Add addendum. Rule 10 had never imagined this. I looked at the binder I had stolen. The memo about cyclical transition events, staff rotation expected, outcome not preventable. I understood in a slow, sickening way that the ward was not a place of treatment. It was a mechanism. The patients were not the only ones admitted. Staff were being processed too. The rules were a way to delay the moment when staff became part of the roster. I tried to call administration. The on-call supervisor line went to voicemail. I called security. Dispatch answered, but the voice on the line was wrong. It was my voice, slightly distorted. Security, my voice said. I hung up. Reed asked if we should evacuate. That was a laughable concept in a locked psychiatric hospital during a storm. You did not evacuate without administration approval and law enforcement support. You did not evacuate at 3 in the morning in the Delta with lightning cracking overhead. But I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out and never come back. I checked the main doors. They were locked. The panel showed red. I swiped my badge. The reader beeped, but the panel, stayed red. I tried again. Red. I tried the emergency release. It did nothing. I returned to the station. Reed watched me with wide eyes. "We're locked in," I said, and hearing it out loud made my voice feel far away. The building had done what it did to patients. It had prevented exit. The rules on the sheet suddenly read differently. Do not answer static. Do not provide the date. Do not respond to your name over the speaker. They were not safety measures. They were containment measures. They prevented you from engaging with the system in the wrong way. Because engagement was admission. The next hours blurred into a sequence of tasks that felt both normal and profoundly wrong. I did rounds. I checked wrists. I avoided eye contact when the rule demanded. I did med pass even though the clock was unreliable. I documented even though the system did not believe in stable identities anymore. And in return, the ward remained just calm enough to keep functioning. That was the cruel efficiency of it. It did not punish you with chaos. It rewarded you with manageability. It made you complicit. At around 5 in the morning, the storm eased. The generator stabilized. The door panel stopped cycling. The intercom went silent. I thought maybe the cycle had passed. Maybe the building had glitched and recovered. Then Room 12's call light turned on. Room 12 was Casey, or Parker, or whoever the system had decided tonight. The call light blinked steadily. Not urgent, not flashing. A polite request. I went because that was what nurses did. Reed followed at a distance. Rule 2 demanded Room 12 not be entered first on rounds, but this was not a round. This was a call light. I opened the door. The room was empty. The bed was made. The pillow was centered. The mattress was bare of body impression. The air smelled freshly cleaned, like the room had never been used. On the bedside table sat a clipboard with an intake form clipped to it. A paper. Intake form, the old kind with carbon copy sheets. The top of the form had my name printed in the patient name field. Not handwritten, printed, like it had been typed. My date of birth field was blank. My diagnosis field was blank. My legal status field was blank. In the chief complaint line, someone had written in neat block letters, "Non-compliance anxiety." My hands trembled as I lifted the clipboard. The paper felt damp, as if it had absorbed humidity from somewhere deeper than the hallway. Rule 5 said do not leave intake forms with blank fields. If a field could not be filled, write unavailable and initial. My mind tried to reject it. This was absurd. It was a prank. It was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But Reed's sharp inhale told me he saw it too. "What is that?" Reed whispered. "It's," I said, and could not finish. From the hallway, the overhead speaker clicked. Static hissed, longer than 3 breaths. I did not move. My body was frozen. Clipboard heavy in my hands. The speaker opened anyway, and a voice began to read the intake form out loud. My name, my age, my address, my emergency contact. Details that were in my employment file, not in any patient chart. The voice paused at blank fields, and then in Morgan's monotone it said, "Unavailable." Then it continued. At the bottom, where a nurse signature line would be, there was a signature already there, Laurel's name. I backed out of the room. Reed grabbed my elbow. We returned to the station. I placed the clipboard on the counter as if it were contaminated. My stomach churned. The charting system screen left open, refreshed. My name was now listed as a patient on the roster. Bed assignment. Room 12. Observation level, constant. I stared at it. I had been charting all night under my staff login. I had been following rules. I had been complying to delay convergence. And now the system had placed me. The handoff binder, open to The page with predicted notes showed a new line written in fresh ink like someone had just written it. Room 12 cleared for transition, intake complete. Staff absorption scheduled at shift change. Shift change was 7 in the morning, less than 2 hours away. I understood then what inevitable convergence meant in that memo. The rules were not to stop the ward from doing this. They were to stretch the timeline so that the transition happened at shift change, when staff changed, when paperwork changed hands, when identities could slip under the cover of routine. The ward did not want chaos. It wanted continuity. It wanted someone to remain. The final rule on the sheet, Rule 14, was one I had read but never understood because it sounded like a joke. Rule 14. At shift change, if you were still on the unit, do not leave your badge on the counter. Wear it. If your badge no longer opened doors, do not panic. Take a seat at the nurse's station and begin, writing the shift handoff note as if you were the outgoing nurse. That had sounded like superstition. Now it sounded like instruction for becoming part of the system. I did what any professional would do when faced with something impossible. I tried to create a plan based on procedure. We could call administration again when day staff arrived. We could explain. We could show them the roster change. We could show them the intake form. We could file incident reports. We could escalate. But the ward had already demonstrated it could control phones. It could control doors. It could control documentation. It could control what people believed by controlling what records showed. If day staff arrived and saw my name on the patient roster, what would they assume? They would assume I had been admitted. They would assume Reed was the tech on shift. They would assume Laurel had signed the intake. They would treat me like a patient because the chart told them to. My license, my identity, my credibility all lived in documentation. The ward owned documentation. I told Reed we needed to leave before shift change. We tried the doors again. The main doors remained red. The badge reader beeped and denied. We tried the side corridor door. Red. Denied. We tried the back stairwell even though it was still before 4 and Rule 9 said not to check it. It was now closer to 6, but the stairwell still smelled like wet concrete and cold paper. The door to the stairwell was unlocked. Green. No badge swipe. Rule 6 said do not pass through. Reed looked at me. "We're leaving," he said. I hesitated. Following the rule felt like breathing. Breaking it felt like stepping off a cliff. But the rule had not saved me. It had only delayed. I stepped through the door. The stairwell lights were on, but dim like an emergency setting. The concrete steps descended into darkness. The sound of paper flipping rose again, steady and relentless, coming from below. Reed followed. The door closed behind us and locked with a click that sounded final. We descended one flight, then another. The air grew colder. The humidity vanished. My skin prickled. On the landing between floors, there was a nurse's station, not a stairwell landing. A nurse's station. A counter, a computer monitor, a chair, and a wall panel with door statuses. It looked like the Unit C station, but older, with different screens, different labels. The fluorescent light above it buzzed in a lower tone. On the counter sat a stack of rule sheets, freshly typed, each one folded twice. Behind the station, on a wall that should have been concrete, there was a window looking into a corridor identical to Unit C's east hallway. Patients walked there, slowly, quietly. Their faces were turned away. Their wristbands glowed white in the dim. Reed whispered, "What is this place?" I did not answer because my mind had caught on a detail that made me feel nauseated. On the roster, a screen visible on the old monitor, I saw names, not patient names. Staff names spanning decades listed as if they were patients. Laurel was there. Reed was there. I was there. And under my name in a column labeled Roll, it did not say patient. It said, night intake? I realized then that the ward had not been a ward. It had been the surface level of something deeper, something that cycled through caretakers to maintain itself. The stairwell was not a stairwell. It was a funnel. The rules were not superstition. They were a script designed to guide a person into the correct position at the correct time, so the system could keep its continuity without overt collapse. Laurel had not transferred. Laurel had been absorbed. She had become a voice on the intercom. She had become a signature on an intake form. She had become part of the mechanism. I did not know if that meant she was dead or trapped or transformed into something non-human. The horror was not physical, it was administrative. It was being reassigned. Reed stepped toward the counter and grabbed a rule sheet, as if holding it could anchor him. His hands shook. The paper flipping sound intensified, like someone had reached the end of a stack and started a new one. The old monitor screen refreshed, and Reed's name moved positions, sliding down the roster as if his status had changed. Reed saw it too. He backed away, eyes wide. "We need to go back," he said. Behind us, the stairwell upward was darker than it should have been. The lights above seemed farther away. I realized that leaving the unit before shift change might not have mattered. The cycle did not end at the unit doors. It extended into the building structure, into its records, into its hidden levels. We turned back anyway because movement felt like agency. We climbed. The steps seemed longer. The landings felt delayed. The air grew humid again, but the sound of paper flipping followed us like a shadow. When we reached the door back into Unit C, the panel was green. Unlocked, no badge swipe. We stepped through and the door locked behind us. The ward looked normal. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The day room was quiet. Patients slept. The monitors showed their rooms. But the roster screen on the nurses' station now showed something different. It showed Laurel as the nurse on duty. It showed Reed as the tech. It showed me as the patient in room 12. And under assigned nurse, it listed Laurel. I checked the clock. 6:58. Shift change. The double doors buzzed as day staff arrived. I heard voices, normal, tired, complaining about traffic and weather. Keys jangled. The lock clicked. The doors opened. Blake, the day charge nurse, walked in holding coffee. He looked at the station, at Reed, at the monitors, and then at me. His expression tightened. "Who is this?" he asked Reed, nodding toward me like I was a stranger in scrubs. Reed looked at Blake, mouth open, trying to speak. Blake looked down at the roster screen. His face softened into the professional expression you wore when you saw a new admission. "Okay," Blake said gently, like he was addressing a patient. "Let's keep things calm. You're safe here." I tried to speak, my throat closed, my badge felt heavy on my chest like it was not mine. I reached for the rule sheet on my clipboard. My fingers fumbled. The paper was gone. In its place was an intake form clipboard, the same one from room 12 with my name printed at the top. Blake stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "What's your name?" he asked. I heard myself answer, but the answer was wrong. It was not my first name. It was my last name, spoken the way you spoke it off a wristband. "Parker," I said, even though Parker was a patient name from weeks ago. Blake nodded, satisfied, like that matched what he saw on the chart. "All right, Parker," he said. "We'll get you settled." Reed made a sound like a sob. He looked at me with terror and apology. I wanted to tell him to run. I wanted to tell him not to accept the rule sheet when Laurel handed it over. I wanted to tell him the ward did not care about patients. It cared about staffing, but Blake's hand was on my elbow, guiding me gently, firmly toward the hallway. As we passed room 12, the door was open. Inside, the bed was made. The room smelled freshly cleaned. A chair sat in the corner, facing the door, like a place for someone to sit and watch. Blake's voice stayed calm. "We'll get you an assessment. he said. "We'll get you comfortable." I looked back over my shoulder at the nurse's station. Reed stood there, frozen, holding a rule sheet. His eyes were on me. His mouth moved as if he were saying my name, but no sound came out. Above him, the intercom speaker crackled with faint static. Then Laurel's voice, soft and distorted, spoke over it. "Thank you," she said like she was charting, "for participating." Blake guided me into room 12. The door closed. The lock clicked. From the bed, a wristband waited, blank and ready, like a form with fields to be filled. I sat down because my legs could not hold me anymore. The fluorescent light above me buzzed in that familiar tired stutter, and I realized with a slow, sinking certainty that the rules had never been meant to keep the patients safe. They had been meant to keep the night shift staffed. The intercom did not need my voice to speak my name anymore because the ward had already written me into its roster. Even now, when I hear static in a quiet building, I still find myself counting breaths, waiting for it to stop on its own. Because part of me believes compliance will buy time, and part of me knows the only thing the rules ever delayed was my turn.